Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts or story in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. Now, before I begin, tell me, where are you watching from? I'd love to know which cities and towns are joining me for this memory that stayed with me for years. It happened on a quiet Sunday afternoon, the kind that carried the soft hum of ordinary life. The sun poured through my kitchen window, painting streaks of gold across the table where I had just finished setting 2 cups of tea. My grandson, Ethan, had called that morning asking if he could stop by. His voice sounded hesitant, the kind of tone that makes a grandmother's heart pay attention. When he arrived, I noticed it right away. Something was off. He wasn't his usual bright self. Normally, he'd come in with that familiar grin, teasing me about my old-fashioned curtains or asking for extra sugar in his tea. But this time, he stood at the doorway for a moment too long, as if deciding whether to walk in or turn back. "Come in, sweetheart," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "You'll let all the good air out." He smiled weakly and stepped inside. I watched as he took off his shoes and ran a hand through his hair, something he always did when he was nervous. My heart began to ache with curiosity and concern. It had been years since I'd seen him this uneasy, probably not since his high school days when he came to tell me he failed his first math exam. We sat down, the tea between us steaming quietly. The clock ticked softly from the wall. Outside, the sound of distant lawnmowers hummed through the neighborhood. I wanted to speak, to fill the silence, but something told me to wait. Finally, he looked up. "Grandma," he began, his voice trembling slightly, "there's something I need to tell you. I don't know how you'll take it." Those words froze the air. My mind raced, imagining all sorts of possibilities. A health problem, a secret mistake, maybe even trouble at work. But I stayed still, giving him the space he needed. "I'll listen," I said. "Whatever it is, just say it." He nodded, eyes darting toward the window. "It's something I've been keeping inside for a while," he said quietly, "and I can't hide it anymore." The way he said it, the weight in his voice, made my chest tighten. He wasn't just nervous, he was scared, and not of me, but of what I might think. That realization softened me instantly. I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. "Ethan," I said, "you don't have to be afraid of me. I've seen the worst storms in this life, and I'm still standing. Whatever this is, we'll face it together." He gave a small, broken laugh, his shoulders relaxing just a bit. "You always say the right thing," he murmured, but then he went quiet again, as if searching for courage somewhere inside him. I watched the clock's hands move, each second stretching longer than the last. The sound of the teacups cooling filled the silence. I wanted to reach him, to pull the truth out and ease his burden, but I knew rushing would only make it harder. Finally, he exhaled deeply, as though he'd made a decision. "I didn't come here to make you worry," he said softly. "But I need to tell you something about myself, something I've been hiding from everyone." The words hung in the air like a fragile thread. My pulse quickened, but I kept my face calm. "I don't care what it is," I told him. "You're my grandson. That's not going to change." He looked at me then, his eyes glassy but determined. "I hope you mean that," he whispered, "because after today, things might feel different." The sunlight had shifted, casting long shadows across the kitchen floor. The steady rhythm of my heartbeat echoed in my ears as I waited for the words that would change something deep within both of us. He opened his mouth to speak, his hand trembling slightly under mine. Whatever truth he was about to reveal, I could feel it wasn't just a secret. It was something that had shaped him, something that had weighed on him for far too long. And in that moment, I realized that no matter what came next, love, real love, was about listening, not judging. He took a shaky breath and finally began to speak. He started slowly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Grandma," he said, eyes fixed on the teacup in front of him, I've been pretending to be okay for a long time, but I'm not. My breath caught. Every instinct inside me wanted to reach for him, to hold him the way I used to when he scraped his knees as a boy. But I stayed still, letting him find his words. The silence between us wasn't heavy anymore. It was careful, like the pause before something fragile is revealed. He continued, his words trembling. I thought if I worked harder, smiled more, no one would notice. But I can't do it anymore. I can't keep living like everything's fine when it isn't. Outside, the wind brushed against the window, carrying the faint scent of rain. I felt the air in the room shift. His confession wasn't about failure. It was about pain. Not the kind you can fix with advice or money, but the kind that settles deep in someone's heart. Ethan, I said softly, you don't have to pretend with me. Tell me what's been hurting you. He nodded slowly, his voice breaking as he spoke. It's like I don't recognize myself anymore. I wake up and feel like I'm wearing someone else's life. I do everything people expect of me, but it feels hollow. I'm scared of disappointing everyone, especially you. That last line pierced through me. I leaned forward, resting my hand over his again. Sweetheart, I said, you could never disappoint me. The only thing that would hurt me is knowing you've been carrying this alone. He blinked, his eyes glistening. You've always been the one person I could talk to, he said. But I didn't want you to think less of me. I didn't want to seem weak. Weak. The word echoed in my mind. How many times had I heard people, especially men, use that word to hide their pain? I realized then that this wasn't just a moment between us. It was a breaking point, a step toward honesty he'd been too afraid to take. You're not weak, Ethan, I said gently. It takes strength to say what you just did. Real strength. He looked up at me then, searching my face for judgment, and finding none. The walls around his expression began to crumble, and in that moment I saw the little boy he once was, curious, kind, and full of light. I've been trying to tell Mom and Dad, he said, but they don't really listen. They think I'm just tired or ungrateful. But it's more than that. I feel lost. I could see how hard it had been for him to carry this alone. His shoulders looked lighter now, though his eyes still held the storm. I took a slow breath, thinking before I spoke. You know, I said, when I was your age, I went through something similar. Everyone thought I had everything together. A job, a family, a home. But inside, I was terrified I was living someone else's dream. It took me years to admit that to myself. He looked surprised. You? He asked quietly. I nodded. Me. Sometimes we lose pieces of ourselves trying to meet everyone's expectations. But life has a way of reminding us who we are, usually through moments like this. For the first time since he'd arrived, he smiled faintly. You make it sound like it's okay to not have it all figured out. It is, I said. You're still finding your path. That's what being human is about. Learning, falling, standing up again. He let out a shaky laugh, half relief, half disbelief. I don't know what I expected today, but I feel like I can breathe again. I smiled back at him, my heart warm and aching all at once. That's what truth does, I said. It sets you free, even when it hurts. The rain began to fall outside, tapping gently on the window pane. We sat there in silence, watching the soft drizzle turn the world silver. It wasn't a silence of fear anymore. It was peace, the kind that comes after years of holding your breath. And as he reached for his tea, his hand brushed mine again. This time it didn't tremble. As the rain softened outside, the air between us began to feel lighter, like something invisible had finally lifted from the room. Ethan leaned back in his chair, tracing his finger along the rim of his cup, lost in thought. His face looked calmer now, though I could still sense that what he'd shared wasn't the whole story. There was more, something deeper that he hadn't yet dared to say. I stayed quiet, waiting. Years of being a mother and grandmother had taught me that silence could be more powerful than words. When someone feels safe enough, they'll open their heart on their own. "Grandma," he said after a while, voice low, "there's something else. Something I've never told anyone." I nodded gently. "Take your time, dear." He took a breath, his eyes flicking toward the window where the rain trailed down in narrow streams. "You know how everyone always thought I'd have my life figured out by now? A stable job, a plan, maybe even a family someday." He gave a soft, humorless laugh. "But the truth is, I feel like I'm pretending to be someone I'm not. I've been living for other people's approval for so long that I don't even know what makes me happy anymore." His words hit me like a quiet thunderclap. There was something raw and painfully honest about them. I saw myself in him again, the same confusion I'd once carried when I was younger, when I tried to fit into boxes that didn't belong to me. "Ethan," I said softly, "you're not alone in that feeling. Most people spend half their lives trying to be who others want them to be. The real courage is in deciding to stop." He looked up, eyes tired but curious. "How did you do it?" I smiled faintly, thinking back to the years when I too had walked that uncertain road. "One day," I said, "I realized I couldn't keep living for other people's happiness. I started small, changing little things. The way I spoke, the choices I made, the people I surrounded myself with. And slowly, I began to feel like myself again. You don't have to change your whole world in a day. You just have to take one honest step at a time." He was silent for a long moment. Then he whispered, "I think that's what I want. To be honest about who I am, even if not everyone understands." I reached for his hand again, feeling the warmth of his skin against mine. "And I'll be here every step of the way. You don't have to hide who you are to be loved, Ethan. Not from me." His lips trembled with the beginnings of a smile. "You mean that?" "With all my heart," I said. He exhaled deeply, as if releasing years of hidden weight. The sound of the rain outside seemed to echo that release, steady and cleansing. Then, almost shyly, he said, "Grandma, the truth is, I've been afraid of what people would think if I stopped pretending. If I stopped trying to fit in." I squeezed his hand gently. "People will always have opinions, sweetheart. But at the end of the day, you're the one who has to live with your choices. The only approval that truly matters is your own." He looked down, nodding slowly, his voice trembling. "It's just hard, you know, to admit you're not who everyone thought you were." "Maybe," I said, "but it's even harder to live your whole life as someone you're not." That made him laugh softly, and it was the most genuine sound I'd heard from him all day. We sat there for a while longer, the quiet filled with comfort instead of tension. Outside, the sky began to clear, a pale light breaking through the clouds. He glanced toward it and said, almost to himself, "It feels like the world looks different now." "Maybe it's because you're finally seeing it through your own eyes," I said. He nodded, smiling. And for the first time since he'd arrived, he looked at peace. Uncertain still, yes, but not afraid of that uncertainty anymore. In that moment, I understood something too. Sometimes love isn't about giving answers. It's about giving someone a safe place to find them on their own. And as the rain stopped and the sun peeked shyly through the clouds, I realized that the truth he had shared today hadn't just changed him. It had changed me too. The next morning, the world felt fresh. The rain had washed everything clean, and a pale sunlight filtered through the curtains like a quiet blessing. I stood by the kitchen window, watching droplets slide down the leaves in the garden. For the first time in months, I felt something different inside me, a calm that came from knowing Ethan had finally spoken his truth. He arrived again just before noon, holding a paper bag that smelled faintly of coffee and warm pastries. "Peace offering," he said with a shy grin, setting it on the table. I smiled. No need for offerings, sweetheart. Yesterday was enough. He sat down, his shoulders no longer hunched. The heaviness that had shadowed him for so long seemed to have lifted, replaced by something gentler, a quiet confidence, maybe, or simply relief. We talked about ordinary things at first. His classes, the movie he'd watched, the neighbor's cat that kept sneaking into his yard. It was simple, easy conversation. But beneath it all, I could sense that he was still processing everything he'd shared. After a moment, he said softly, "I kept thinking about what you told me last night, about being honest with myself." I nodded. And he took a deep breath, his fingers fidgeting with the edge of his napkin. I decided I'm done pretending. I'm going to start making choices that actually feel like mine, even if people don't understand them. Hearing him say that made something swell inside me. Pride, love, maybe even awe. "That's brave," I said. "It won't always be easy, but it'll be real. And that's worth everything." He smiled faintly. "I know. I used to think I had to be perfect. The perfect son, the perfect student, the perfect person. But I realize now that perfection's just another kind of mask." I reached across the table, touching his hand. "And masks might keep us safe for a while," I said, "but they also keep us from being seen. I'm glad you're ready to be seen, Ethan. Truly." He squeezed my hand in return. There was gratitude in his eyes, not just for my words, but for the space to be himself without fear. We spent the afternoon walking in the garden. The air was cool and damp, and the scent of wet soil filled the space between our words. Birds hopped along the fence, their feathers glistening in the sunlight. Ethan stopped to look at a small patch of flowers I'd planted years ago. "You always manage to keep these alive," he said, smiling. "They thrive when they're cared for," I replied. "They just need a bit of light and patience." He nodded, and I could see that he understood, that I wasn't just talking about flowers. As the day stretched into late afternoon, we sat on the porch steps, watching the light fade into a soft orange glow. "You know," he said quietly, "I used to think you'd be disappointed if I told you how lost I felt. I thought I'd let you down." I turned to him, my heart full. "Oh, Ethan," I said, "love isn't something you earn by being perfect. It's what remains when everything else falls away. I'm proud of you, not for who people expect you to be, but for who you're becoming." He swallowed hard, eyes shimmering. I think I needed to hear that more than anything. We stayed there until the sun slipped behind the trees. The sky turned the color of faded gold, and the first stars began to appear. In that quiet glow, I realized something profound. The moment he had told me his truth, it didn't just change how I saw him. It changed how I saw myself. For years, I'd carried my own silence, the things I never said, the fears I buried under the duties of motherhood and age. But watching Ethan choose honesty reminded me that it's never too late to live with openness. That courage doesn't belong to the young. It belongs to anyone willing to step into the light. When he finally stood to leave, he hugged me tighter than he ever had before. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" I asked, smiling into his shoulder. "For listening, for not trying to fix me, for just being here." As he walked down the path toward his car, I felt tears sting my eyes, not from sadness, but from something deeper. Pride, gratitude, hope. I knew life would still test him, but I also knew he'd face it differently now, grounded, open, true to himself. And as I closed the door and leaned against it, I whispered to the empty room, "Sometimes the hardest truths lead us to the most beautiful places." That evening, as the stars shimmered above and the house fell silent, I realized that love, in all its quiet, imperfect forms, had done what it always does best. It healed what fear had hidden. And for that, I would be forever thankful.